This is TechCrunch.
For more than a decade, makers of government spyware have defended themselves from criticism by saying that their surveillance technology is intended to be used only against serious criminals and terrorists, and only in limited cases. The evidence gathered from dozens, if not hundreds, of documented instances of spyware abuse all over the world, however, shows that neither of those arguments are true. Journalists, human rights activists, and politicians have repeatedly been targeted in both repressive regimes and democratic countries. The latest example is a political consultant who works for left-wing politicians in Italy, who came out as the most recently confirmed victim of Paragon spyware in the country. This latest case shows that spyware is proliferating far beyond the scope of what we have typically considered to be rare or limited attacks, targeting only a few people at a time. Eva Galperin, the director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who has studied spyware for years, told TechCrunch, "I think that there is some misunderstanding at the heart of stories about who gets targeted by this kind of government spyware, which is that if you are targeted, you are public enemy number one." In reality, because targeting is so easy, we have seen governments use surveillance malware to spy on a broad range of people, including relatively minor political opponents, activists, and journalists, said Galperin. There are several reasons that explain why spyware often ends up on the devices of people who, in theory, should not be targeted. The first explanation lies in the way that spyware systems work. Generally, when an intelligence or law enforcement agency purchases spyware from a surveillance vendor, like NSO Group, Paragon, and others, the government customer pays a one-time fee to acquire the technology, and then lower additional fees for future software updates and tech support. The upfront fee is usually based on the number of targets that the government agency can spy on at any moment in time. The more targets, the higher the price. Previously leaked documents from the now-defunct hacking team show that some of its police and government customers could target anywhere from a handful of people to an unlimited number of devices at once. While some democratic countries typically had fewer targets that they could surveil in one go, it wasn't uncommon to see countries with questionable human rights records with an extremely high number of concurrent spyware targets. Giving such a high number of concurrent targets to countries with such strong appetites for surveillance all but guaranteed that the governments would target far more people outside the scope of just criminals and terrorists. Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia have all been caught targeting journalists and activists over the years. Security researcher Runa Sandvik, who works with activists and journalists who are at risk of being hacked, curates an ever-expanding list of cases of spyware abuse around the world. Another reason for the high number of abuses, especially in recent years, is that spyware, such as NSO's Pegasus or Paragon's Graphite, makes it extremely easy for government customers to successfully target whoever they want. In practice, those systems are essentially consoles where police or government officials type in a phone number, and the rest happens in the background. John Scott Railton, a senior researcher at the Citizen Lab who has investigated spyware companies and their abuses for a decade, said that government spyware carries a huge abuse temptation for government customers. Scott Railton said spyware needs to be treated like the threat to democracy and elections that it is. The general lack of transparency and accountability has also contributed to governments brazenly using this sophisticated surveillance technology without fear of consequences. Galperin told TechCrunch, "The fact that we have seen targeting of relatively small fish is particularly concerning because it reflects the relative impunity that the government feels in deploying this exceptionally invasive spyware against opponents. In terms of victims getting accountability, there is some good news. Paragon made a point of very publicly cutting ties with the Italian government earlier this year, arguing that the country's authorities refused help from the company in investigating abuses allegedly involving its spyware. NSO Group previously revealed in court that it disconnected 10 government customers in recent years for abusing its spyware technology, although it refused to say which countries. And it's unclear if those include the Mexican or Saudi government, where there have been countless documented cases of abuse. On the customer side, countries like Greece and Poland have launched investigations into spyware abuses. The United States, during the Biden administration, targeted some spyware makers such as Citrox, Intellexa, and NSO Group by imposing sanctions on the companies and their executives and putting them on economic block lists. Also, a group of mostly Western countries led by the UK and France are trying to use diplomacy to put the brakes on the spyware market. It remains to be seen if any of these efforts will curb or limit in any way what is now a global multi-billion-dollar market, with companies more than happy to supply advanced spyware to governments with a seemingly endless appetite to spy on pretty much everyone they want to. People often think about tech bubbles in apocalyptic terms, but it doesn't have to be as serious as all that. In economic terms, a bubble is a bet that turns out to be too big, leaving you with more supply than demand. The upshot? It's not all or nothing, and even good bets can turn sour if you aren't careful about how you make them. What makes the question of the AI bubble so tricky to answer is mismatched timelines between the breakneck pace of AI software development and the slow crawl of constructing and powering a data center. Because these data centers take years to build, a lot will inevitably change between now and when they come online. The supply chain that powers AI services is so complex and fluid that it's hard to have any clarity on how much supply we'll need a few years from now. It isn't simply a matter of how much people will be using AI in 2028, but how they'll be using it and whether we'll have any breakthroughs in energy, semiconductor design, or power transmission in the meantime. When a bet is this big, there are lots of ways it can go wrong, and AI bets are getting very big indeed. Last week, Reuters reported an Oracle-linked data center campus in New Mexico has drawn as much as $18 billion in credit from a consortium of 20 banks. Oracle has already contracted $300 billion in cloud services to OpenAI, and the companies have joined with SoftBank to build $500 billion in total AI infrastructure as part of the Stargate project. Meta, not to be outdone, has pledged to spend $600 billion on infrastructure over the next 3 years. At the same time, there is real uncertainty about how fast demand for AI services will grow. A McKinsey survey released last week looked at how top firms are employing AI tools. The results were mixed. Almost all the businesses contacted are using AI in some way, yet few are using it on any real scale. AI has allowed companies to cost cut in specific use cases, but it's not making a dent on the overall business. In short, most companies are still in wait-and-see mode. If you're counting on those companies to buy space in your data center, you may be waiting a long time. But even if AI demand is endless, these projects could run into more straightforward infrastructure problems. Last week, Satya Nadella surprised podcast listeners by saying he was more concerned with running out of data center space than running out of chips. As he put it, it's not a supply issue of chips, it's the fact that I don't have warm shells to plug into. At the same time, whole data centers are sitting idle because they can't handle the power demands of the latest generation of chips. While NVIDIA and OpenAI have been moving forward as fast as they possibly can, the electrical grid and built environment are still moving at the same pace they always have. That leaves lots of opportunity for expensive bottlenecks, even if everything else goes right. If you'd like to hear more, check out this week's TechCrunch Equity Podcast. That's it from TechCrunch. For more tech stories like these, go to TechCrunch.com.